Hey everyone, it's Cecil from Keep It Classy, and for this video it's mostly going to be me just talking about some stuff, 2021 OLED price drops, how I feel about the A80J so far, the C1, thoughts on the G1 and A90J, and in the background what I'm doing is showing a full game of Fortnite played on the Xbox Series X, and this is an SDR game. It is not HDR, and what I wanted to do is just play through the whole game and see how much the ABL, or automatic brightness limiter, on the A80J will cause the image to dim. Now it's a little complicated to show because the game does have a varying time of day, but there's a couple things you can look out for. One is as it plays through and the level gets brighter, just keep an eye out for when it seems like the image is dimming, and it's very subtle, but I have noticed it. There's a few times here and there when I'm playing the game that it just, like, I can tell that it's kicked in, but it's so subtle and happens so slowly that it's almost like, wait a minute, did something change? That kind of effect. It's not a instant thing. It's not very distracting. It's just, it seems like it should be a little brighter than it is right now. So, compared to the LG C1, the C1 does not let you use the peak brightness setting in SDR game mode, so it was pretty much always dim. So at least with this, most of the time, it's rather bright. And the other thing that I've noticed is on the LG, there's the OLED burn-in prevention option where you can dim the HUD elements or stuff that's always on the screen. So like if you look at like the weapon bar or the health bar, the mini map, that kind of thing. On LG that was a setting where you could set it to off, low, or high. On here it seems like it's automatic. Like there are just times where you can just tell that it has dimmed them, but at the start of a match they seem full brightness. So it just seems like the TV is just auto detecting HUD elements and then just dimming them over time on its own. The only burn-in prevention setting on the A80J and assumedly the A90J is the pixel shifting one, or the pixel refresher, which is where turn the TV off and it runs for a few hours. Alright, so before I get into the price drops and all of that, I also want to say that I took some brightness measurements of the A80J. Now, I did so with about 2 hours on the TV, so it's not nearly broken in yet. And again, something to remember when taking brightness measurements, there's so many variables that can affect it. You have your panel variance, you have your the tool that you use to measure can affect your result, and the biggest thing is how long you leave the pattern on the screen. Because if you take your measurement as soon as the pattern comes up, so you have a black screen and then your little 10% or whatever percent window comes on screen and it takes the measurement right then, it's not going to be nearly as bright as if you leave that pattern on screen for a while. So the question becomes, how long do you leave it on screen? Because there is no standard for the testing, and that's why you see such huge variances in measurements from different review sites. So in talking to some other people, I think leaving it on screen for 10 seconds is a good amount of time. So I would put it up on the screen, let it take a measurement. That takes 2 to 3 seconds, count to 6, hit the button, and then it'll take another one. And that's the number that I use. So using that method, I found the 10% window to be roughly the same as the C1. The C1, using that method, I would get about 740 once it was set into an accurate mode. This, I got 720. However, every other window size, going larger or smaller, was brighter on the A80J. So at full field with the C1, I would get about 130, whereas full field on the A80J would get 155. And then going down smaller, so your what would essentially be your specular highlights, the 1% window, the A80J got really bright, and I noticed that it really climbs a lot the longer that's on there. So it measured 825 at first, and then the longer it was on there, it kept climbing and climbing up to 875 nits. And then after let's say 30 seconds or so, then it settles back down and started measuring a fairly consistent 865 nits. So based on that and what I have seen from other reviews on the A90J, again, I don't have an A90J, but that leads me to believe that the heatsink on the A90J allows it to reach that peak faster and sustain a higher number longer, but not necessarily reach that much of a higher number. So I don't think you're losing a ton of brightness going from A90J to A80J. I think, like I said, that heatsink is just there to help it sustain the brightness more. And I'm not saying that the A90J isn't brighter overall or it's not reaching higher numbers. I'm saying that those numbers that it can reach shouldn't be that visually noticeable. Maybe if they're side by side, you could tell a little bit, but really, I think it comes down to they're the same panel with the same software, the same SoC, the same XR processor, the same MediaTek chip. Like, it's all the same except for that heatsink. And again, this is my opinion. This is based on everything that I've read and seen and watched on the A90J versus what I'm seeing with the A80J. So it's not unfounded of a decision, but it's also not, guaranteed fact. So again, that's just how I feel that it is at this point in time. So that now brings me to pricing and buying recommendations while these prices are going on. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware that the 77-inch A80J just had a massive discount of $1,000, which is unheard of to happen as it's releasing. And I have, again, some just personal thoughts or ideas onto why that is. Again, there's no way to prove that, but what I'm thinking happened is Sony looked at their lineup, and the A80J was the only OLED they had in 77 inches, and then they compare that to LG, and Sony pretty much always wants to price their products a little bit higher, and I think they pretty much really kind of do that just off of their name. Like, they just feel like they can, and they probably do, because there is a lot of people that buy Sony just because of their name. However, this time I really think that the A80J, performance-wise, really should be competing with the G1, and probably even better than the G1. When it comes to features, connectivity, all-around reliability, and just having everything working, LG definitely wins that department. But in just terms of pure raw image quality, the XR processor, the brightness, I think Sony has that in the bag over even the G1. And I think Sony was targeting the G1 as the price competitor for the A80J to start with, but then realized that a lot of people actually are concerned with not having 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, not having VRR or ALLM, the eARC not passing through Dolby or DTS when at 120 Hertz without dropouts. Just a lot of things like that add up, and especially with a lot of the reviewers and YouTubers just instantly recommending LG to gamers. And I think that comes from the most outspoken gamers are usually the ones that are competitive and are worried about things like VRR, and they want the higher refresh rates and the better gaming performance. And yes, LG delivers that in spades. But for the more casual gamers or people who care more about graphics or looks and image quality, the Sony OLEDs do look better in game modes. And their performance still isn't bad, it's just not on the level of LG, and not having VRR is really hurting them at this point in time. So that's, for me personally, the LG C1 not having the peak brightness setting and SDR gaming really hurt it. Like, that was the one main reason that I switched to the A80J. About a third of my content on the TV is SDR gaming, and coming from an 85-inch LED, and prior to that a Samsung KS8000, which was a very bright TV. You know, it was too much of a drastic change for me that I couldn't adjust to in that just one setting. Everything else about the C1 is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So again, if you are a competitive gamer, if performance matters to you, if you want the smoothest gameplay experience, and especially if you have multiple HDMI 2.1 devices, you want to go for the LG C1. The LG G1 possibly could get a little bit brighter in SDR game mode with a more relaxed ABL. That I have yet to find anyone actually measure that, and it's kind of bugging me. That was my original plan, was to get the G1 and measure that and see for myself if it was bright enough. But then I saw, you know, you can use peak luminance on the Sonys, and then it's a night and day difference. So possibly the G1 in SDR game mode might get 275 to 300 nits at most. The C1 caps at 250, and you know, being able to use the peak luminance up to high on the Sony, I mean, we're talking high 300s or into the 400s, so it's a major difference. And then also with the Sony, the colors are not necessarily brighter, but they have more depth to them. It's like the color, there's a higher contrast to the colors, and it makes details stand out a little bit more. So again, if you're not too worried about having the absolute smoothest gameplay experience or the best gaming performance, and you like better image quality, better graphics, then you're the kind of gamer who would want the Sony. And then when it comes to HDR, the specular highlights will shine brighter on the A80J than they will on the C1 and possibly the G1, but it's not a night and day difference there. It's just they are brighter. Maybe if they're next to each other you could tell, but short of that, it would be, you know, you wouldn't know what you were missing, so I wouldn't worry about the HDR brightness differences. And now for the pricing, if you look around, you're probably still going to see the LG C1 77-inch at $3,799 or $3,800. However, I completely did not know this. This must be a brand new thing. But Lowe's, you know, the Home Depot competitor, well, Lowe's is now selling TVs. They have the LG C1 77-inch listed at $3,500, and you can get, you know, Best Buy or wherever you like to buy your TVs to price match them. And that puts it at the exact same price as the A80J 77-inch. And then down in the 65-inch, I'm pretty sure they're both $2,500. I think the Sony was $2,800, and now it's knocked down to $2,500. So when it comes to the A90J, you would have to compare the 65-inch price to the 77-inch price of the A80J, and the 77-inch A80J is still cheaper by $300. So to me and most people, that's a no-brainer. Get the 77-inch A80J over the 65-inch A90J, unless you're sitting, you know, 6.5 feet or less. Then it might be just a little too big. But general rule of thumb that I agree with and is you want 10 inches of screen size for every foot away. So if you're anywhere from 7.5 to 8.5 or more feet, 77-inch should not be too big. You shouldn't have to be turning your head, and you should have a nice immersive experience. Now, so back to the video. At this point, have you seen any obvious dimming? Has it seemed like certain parts got a little darker than maybe they should have? Have you noticed the HUD elements getting a little darker here or there? It seems like it'll dim and then kind of brighten back up, and then dim and kind of brighten back up. It doesn't, again, it's very slow, very subtle. Maybe if you jump around the different points in the video, you might be able to spot it. Overall, like I said, I don't think it's much of an issue. I've just heard other people say that they've noticed the ABL kick in, and again, I can notice it, but not immediately. It's, like I said, it's I'm playing, it's nice and bright, and then all of a sudden, a few minutes later, I'm focused in the game, and it's at a quiet, slow part of the game, and then it's like, wait a second, this looks a little dimmer than it was a few minutes ago. But then something happens and I get completely distracted and it doesn't bother me again, and then all of a sudden it's brighter again. So to me, it's not a big deal. I don't know if it will be to other people, but I still think no matter what, it's better than not being able to get bright enough in the first place, like you don't get on the LG C1, and I would assume on the G1 as well. And playing that part back, like, this is really hard to just even describe, so I'm sure I sound like a rambling fool trying to describe it, but it's not a non-issue, but I don't think it's a big issue either. I don't think the ABL is really going to be that much of a problem for the Sony A80J. And now to quickly touch on movies and TV. Again, the LG C1 was a fantastic TV. I really do love it. But I have to admit, the increased color depth and contrast and all of that on the Sony does make a noticeable difference. There's even watching Smallville, it's an older show, streaming, not high quality. There's just a naturalness to it that the LG was lacking. Now, something I do need to give the LG some credit points for is the white point seems better. Like the color temperature, as long as you set it to warm 50, that's most of what you have to do on the LG when it comes to especially Dolby Vision. For some reason, Sony's this year, I saw it on the X90J, I've seen it in videos of the A90J, and now I see it here on the A80J. There is a bit of a greenish, it's like greenish blue but more green tint to white balance this year on Sony's. And when I took some measurements, first they were really bad, but that was using the D65 white point, and the WOLED TVs should be using the modified Judd offset. So using that, it measures very well, but if you are targeting D65, it is off by a noticeable amount. And I also found using the Kalman software and the controls on the LG to be more in-depth and easier to use. For the Sony, for example, I had to go get a Raspberry Pi, make a pattern generator, and Sony really only lets you use the AutoCal for SDR, and then it will automatically use that information for HDR and Dolby Vision. So if you want more fine-tuning, you get that on the LG. The LG also has a 22-point white balance that is easily accessible. The Sony has a 20-point white balance, and the only way to activate that is to get the Kalman for Bravia app on the TV, and then it opens up the 2 additional picture modes, Pro 1 and 2, and then that's how you can adjust the 20-point white balance controls. So for getting more in-depth settings, more a calibration, the LG gets a win there. It seems like the Sony is more of a put it in their hands and let them handle it for you kind of a setup, whereas the LG gives you everything you need to more faithfully achieve the director's intent or an accurate image. And that's not to say you can't do it on the Sony, it just is easier and in a way cheaper for the average person to do it on the LG, because all you need is a USB thumb drive to get your patterns on there. However, Sony did do an excellent job at the out-of-the-box settings for most of the picture modes, especially when it comes to like your contrast, your brightness, your colors, all of that. You pretty much don't have to mess with anything. I will have a settings video soon, but just a quick tip, like all you really got to do is disable the ambient light sensing and processing features that you don't want, things like that. But the contrast, brightness, colors, you don't really have to touch. So Sony did very well there. And again, LG did well as well. It's just the Sony is a little bit more dialed in out of the box. Alright, so we're coming up to the end of this here, and I originally just started shooting this, expecting, just play for a few minutes, try to capture the ABL. I wasn't expecting to go the distance here at the end, and then right here I made a mistake and grabbed the wrong gun. I thought I grabbed the shotgun, and that's what gives me second place here. But as Jeremy Clarkson likes to say, on that disappointment, I guess we've come to an end. Thanks for watching if you've stuck it around this long, and I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good one.